No, they're fine. How would you feel if you woke up to sirens blaring and look outside to see people in gas masks running for their lives? It would be terrifying, right? Well, that is exactly what happened to the people in Chernobyl on April 26, 1986. A nuclear disaster would be catastrophic no matter where it happened because of the amounts of radiation that would be spilled out. This hasn't stopped people from visiting Chernobyl after the events, which has led to health issues later in life from the extreme radiation exposure. The Chernobyl nuclear disaster was a huge event not only in the Ukraine, but it was heard of all over the world. Although it happened more than 30 years ago, it still affects people to this day. First, I would like to give a short description of the events that happened to cause the explosion and the events that happened immediately after. The operating crew of Unit 4 were testing to see if the turbines in the reactor could produce sufficient energy to keep the coolant pumps running in the event of the loss of power. To prevent any interruptions, the safety systems were shut off, the procedure did not go as planned, and instead of the reactor falling to 25% power capacity, it fell to 1%. 30 seconds into them trying to increase the power, an unexpected power surge happened and the reactor's emergency shutdown failed. This caused the fuel elements to rupture and there was a huge explosion. Sure, everyone. Initial attempts to extinguish the reactor involved firefighters pouring cool water into the reactor, which did not work. From April 27th to May 5th, military helicopters would fly over and pour more than 2,400 tons of water into the burning reactor, which was also unsuccessful. On May 6th, the reactor was finally cooled with nitrogen and the fire and radioactive emissions were under control. Shortly after the events, 31 workers died from various causes. Most of the workers who survived are still suffering from the damage to their health. The death toll of the tragic accident eventually grew to around 50 people, many of them being firefighters and the cleanup crew because they had the most exposure to the radiation. Children and emergency recovery workers were at the highest risk of radiation-induced complications later in life, with the most common being thyroid cancer. Although Chernobyl has been abandoned for years, it is still a very popular site for tourists to visit. There are guided tours that are available, but participants are required to sign a waiver against touching any objects, plant life, or even sitting on the ground. They are also tested to see if they have radioactive materials on their clothing or skin when they leave. The site of Chernobyl has been the site for many documentaries and a few horror movies, and in this picture you can see why. I have explained the tragic nuclear explosion in Chernobyl and how it affected people physically and emotionally. I talked about the extreme levels of radiation and how certain people were affected worse than others. I briefly talked about the death toll and how Chernobyl has been abandoned, but a very popular site for tourists despite the dangers of going there. No one will ever forget this tragic day and event, and I am sure people will continue to visit the site, whether it be legally or illegally, for many years to come. Finally, if you ever get the chance to research this event or watch one of the many films and documentaries about it, I would highly encourage you to do so. It is a huge event in the history of our world, and it is very interesting to learn more about.